The woman marched down the sand like she owned the Atlantic. Blonde bob stiff in the breeze, oversized sunglasses, clipboard clutched like it was a weapon. I was sitting in a beach chair, sipping coffee, watching the tide roll in. My golden retriever, Duke, was digging a hole next to me, tail wagging like he hadn't a care in the world. Then came the voice, sharp, nasal, and way too familiar. "Excuse me, sir. This beach is for community access only. You can't just plant yourself here like it's your backyard." I looked up, already knowing who it was. Cheryl Dunst, HOA president of Harbor Glade Estates, self-appointed queen of property lines, fines, and fake authority. I stood up slowly, brushing sand off my shorts. "Morning to you too, Cheryl." She jabbed the clipboard toward the dunes. "This beach is under HOA jurisdiction. I saw your car parked at the end of the boardwalk. That's for residents only." "I am a resident," I said calmly, "and this beach, it's not under HOA jurisdiction." She actually scoffed. "Don't be ridiculous, Mr. Ames. You moved in 3 months ago. I've been president here for 9 years. I know every parcel. That beach is shared property." I pointed at the wooden post just beyond the dune line. "See that sign? Private property, no trespassing. That's not decorative." She didn't even glance. "That sign's been there for years. Doesn't mean anything. The HOA has final say over all beachfront access." I chuckled. "You're wrong, Cheryl." Her eyes narrowed behind the sunglasses. "Excuse me." I walked over to my bag, pulled out a manila envelope I had brought just for this kind of nonsense. I handed it to her. She opened it, flipped through the pages, and her nose wrinkled like she smelled something foul. "Deed," I said. "From the sale, lot 78. Includes 70 feet of beachfront, all the way to the waterline. Not community property, not subject to HOA oversight." She flipped back to the first page, then the second. Her lips tightened. "I don't care what some outdated deed says," she snapped. "You're in violation of community standards. Community standards don't override property rights," I said. "And if you'd like a copy of the county zoning maps, I've got those too." Her face turned redder than a lobster. She slammed the envelope shut and shoved it back at me. "This isn't over," she hissed. "You'll be hearing from the HOA board." "I hope so," I said. "I'd love to show them the title documents, too." Cheryl spun on her heel, sandals kicking up sand, and stormed back toward the boardwalk. Duke barked once like he was laughing. Honestly, I was too. Because if Cheryl wanted a fight over something I legally owned, I'd be more than happy to give her one. The next morning, I noticed the first sign something was off when Duke wouldn't stop barking at the mailbox. I stepped outside, coffee in hand, and found a folded notice duct taped to the side of the post. Not inside it, taped on like some kind of ransom letter. The HOA seal was stamped at the top in faded blue ink. The message underneath was typed in bold: "Cease and desist use of restricted beach. Immediate compliance required. Fines accrue daily. Harbor Glade Estates HOA." I stared at it for a few seconds, then pulled it off and walked back inside. I'd been a public defender in Chicago for over a decade. I'd seen threats dressed up as official notices before, and this one had a stench to it. No signature, no citation of bylaws, no date, just a vague threat and a seal that looked photocopied, and it wasn't just sloppy. It was illegal. By mid-afternoon, I'd compiled a report. I printed photos of the taped notice, a copy of the county plat map, and my property deed with the parcel lines clearly outlined. Then I walked down the street to lot 62, where Cheryl's white Lexus sat crooked in the driveway like it had been abandoned mid-panic. Her garage door was open, exposing rows of labeled bins and a collapsible table covered in folders. She was inside, pinning laminated sheets to a corkboard. "Afternoon," I said, stepping just past the edge of her driveway. She turned, startled. "You're trespassing." "No, I'm not." I held up the folder. "I came to give you a courtesy packet, because what you did this morning, that little taped-up threat, that's mail tampering and harassment. Both are misdemeanors in this state." She didn't take the folder. She crossed her arms and leaned against the table. "You're trying to intimidate me." "No," I said. "I'm making sure you don't dig yourself in deeper. You're not above the law just because you're in charge of the landscaping committee." Her jaw clenched. "This community has rules. And so does the state," I replied. You're not law enforcement. You can't issue cease and desist orders. You can't fine people for using their own property. And if you think the HOA can override recorded deeds, you're in for a very expensive lesson. She picked up a pen and started scribbling on a pad like I wasn't even there. I set the folder down on the edge of the table. That includes a copy of the penal code. You might want to read it before you tape anything else to my mailbox. I turned and walked away. The next day, my beach was clean. No threats, no signs. But the real storm hit 2 days later. It started with the drone. I was on the deck, oiling the railing, when I heard the high-pitched whine. I looked up to see a small quadcopter hovering just above the dunes. Camera pointed straight at my house. Duke growled, tense at my feet. I pulled out my phone and filmed it. It dipped low, circled once, then zipped back toward the cluster of houses beyond the trees. I followed it on foot, keeping to the public path until I spotted it descending behind Cheryl's backyard. She was out there, holding a tablet, squinting at the screen. "You seriously spying on me with that thing?" I called out. She looked up like I'd caught her picking a lock. "This is authorized surveillance," she said. "By who?" "The HOA board." "Not a chance," I said. "You fly that over my house again, I'll have it down and boxed in evidence. You're violating FAA regulations and state privacy laws." She didn't respond, just turned and disappeared inside. By the end of the week, things escalated again. This time it wasn't a drone or an unsigned notice. It was a bill, a printed invoice for over $3,000 slipped under my door. "Beachfront maintenance penalty," it read. "Unauthorized use of HOA property. Subject to lien if unpaid." I laughed. Then I called my friend Tanya. Tanya wasn't just any lawyer. She was a city council liaison for zoning disputes in the next county over. The kind of person who knew where to dig when someone tried to bury you in paperwork. By the next morning, she'd uncovered something remarkable. "Harbor Glade Estates," she said over speakerphone, "has never registered their updated bylaws with the county. The last official filing is from 18 years ago. Everything they're doing now, beach oversight, drone patrols, fines, none of it's in those bylaws. They're operating on phantom rules." I leaned back in my chair, stunned. "That's why Cheryl keeps bluffing. There's no legal foundation." "Exactly," Tanya said, "and guess what else, that beach? It used to be private property for 5 homes. Yours is one of them. The HOA never completed the transfer when they tried to take control of it 15 years ago. The whole annexation fell through because of a missing signature. Do you have that document?" "I do." "Certified copies on the way." That night, I called a neighborhood meeting. I made flyers, walked the blocks, handed them out personally. No emails, no social media, just face-to-face conversations. When people asked why, I told them it was about Cheryl's overreach. When they asked if it was serious, I showed them the invoice. 32 people showed up. Most of them had stories. "She fined me for a fence I built with a permit," said a retired Navy vet named Carl. "She took photos of my kids playing in the yard," said a nurse named Melinda. "She threatened to revoke my pool access because I didn't attend a meeting," added a teacher named Greg. Everyone was angry. But more than that, they were ready. We formed a committee that night, not some rogue group, a legal, documented subcommittee under the HOA charter. The bylaws, even outdated, allowed for resident committees to oversee board conduct. We called ourselves the Oversight Council. Our first act, file an injunction. Tanya helped us draft the paperwork. We cited the illegal fines, the unauthorized surveillance, and the unregistered bylaw amendments. We submitted it to the county clerk and requested a temporary freeze on all HOA enforcement actions. Within 72 hours, we had a hearing scheduled. Cheryl didn't show. Instead, she sent a man named Douglas, her so-called legal advisor. He wasn't a lawyer. He was her cousin and a licensed notary. He barely got 2 sentences out before the judge cut him off. "You have no standing. You are not counsel, and this board has failed to follow county procedure for over a decade." The judge granted the injunction. All HOA fine collections were suspended pending investigation. Surveillance activities were ordered to cease immediately. Cheryl was instructed to appear in person for a compliance hearing. That afternoon, her Lexus disappeared from the driveway. She didn't come back for 3 days. When she did, she wasn't alone. A city code enforcement officer followed her up the driveway. They walked into her house together. When they came out, she was holding a folder and shaking her head. The following week, a letter arrived, official resignation, effective immediately. The HOA board scrambled to fill the spot. In the next election, Melinda the nurse won by a landslide. We rewrote the bylaws, this time with public input and proper filing. The beach, still mine. But now the HOA respected the line in the sand literally and legally. And Duke. He still digs holes every morning. Only now, sometimes Carl and Greg bring their dogs too. Nobody tapes anything to my mailbox anymore. The week after Cheryl's resignation, things got quiet. Not peaceful, more like the kind of quiet you get before a thunderstorm rips the sky apart. The HOA board tried to act like it was business as usual, but nobody was buying it. Most of the neighborhood had seen the judge's expression when Douglas started rambling about verbal amendments. That kind of thing sticks. I figured the worst was over. I figured wrong. It started on a Thursday. I was working on the dock behind the house, replacing a few warped planks when I heard a sharp knock on the sliding glass door. Melinda stood there, holding a thick white envelope with a county return address and a look that told me something wasn't right. I let her in. "This came to the board's P.O. box," she said, handing it over. "You'll want to read it." Inside was a full audit request from the county assessor's office. Apparently, someone had flagged my parcel for a shoreline boundary discrepancy. It was worded politely, but the underlying accusation was clear. Someone was claiming I'd encroached on public land. I flipped through the pages. Attached was a photocopy of a complaint. The name at the bottom was typed, not signed, Cheryl Dunst. Melinda paced near the kitchen island. She's not even on the board anymore, but she still had access to the filing account. We're locking it down, but this slipped through. I looked at the complaint again. It was detailed, too detailed. It referenced surveyor coordinates, tide line metrics, even satellite imagery, but one thing stood out immediately. "These coordinates aren't even accurate," I said. "She's using a pre-2006 map. The coastline was redrawn after that hurricane. My deed reflects the updated lines." "This is complete fiction," Melinda nodded. "Still, the county has to investigate it. Standard procedure." I called Tanya. She showed up the next day, legal pad in hand, wearing sunglasses and a trench coat like she was preparing for battle. Once I explained the situation, she asked one question. "Where'd she get this?" "What do you mean?" I asked. "This complaint includes files that were never public. Look, this one's a restricted survey from the Coastal Commission. It requires a formal request and approval. That takes weeks." I stared at the paper. The stamp in the corner was real. "But the approval date, only 4 days ago." "She's pulling strings," I said. "Or breaking laws." Tanya nodded slowly. "Maybe both." We filed a public records request for every document submitted under Cheryl's name in the past year. Then we drove to the county survey office downtown. It took a couple hours, but we found it. A forged signature on a shoreline boundary form. Someone had signed the name of a long, retired assessor to push through a fake revision. We turned it over to the sheriff's department that afternoon. By Tuesday, detectives were at Cheryl's house. They didn't arrest her, not yet, but they took her computer, 2 filing boxes, and a hard drive labeled HOA archives. I heard from Carl that she stood on the porch shouting about personal vendettas and ungrateful neighbors until the officers told her to go inside. The next board meeting was packed. It was standing room only, and there were reporters outside. Melinda opened with a simple statement. "The board has voted to permanently revoke Cheryl Dunst's access to all internal systems and documents. We are cooperating fully with law enforcement." Then she handed the microphone to me. I didn't want to speak. I really didn't. But Tanya had insisted it was necessary to clarify the truth before Cheryl spun another lie, so I laid out the facts, the fake complaint, the forged signature, the misuse of protected maps. I played a recording captured legally of Cheryl telling a neighbor that no one would question her if she just adjusted the lines a little. The room went silent. Then Melinda took the mic again. "And for the record," she said, "we've reviewed all beach-related documents. Mr. Ames holds full exclusive ownership of his shoreline property. That is no longer up for debate." Applause broke out, not polite, not hesitant, real applause, but the situation wasn't over yet. The county prosecutor filed charges against Cheryl 2 days later: fraud, falsifying government documents, and obstruction of a public office. I read the indictment twice. It was surreal. The woman who lectured neighbors about hedge height and mailbox color was now facing felony charges. Meanwhile, the HOA board found itself sitting on a powder keg. Turns out, Cheryl hadn't just tampered with beach records. She'd been quietly siphoning money from the Community Improvement Fund to pay for consulting services that didn't exist. Over $20,000 gone paid to a shell company registered in her cousin's name. Melinda called an emergency vote. The board froze all discretionary spending and hired an independent auditor. When the full financial report came back, people were furious. Cheryl had used HOA funds to pay for drone equipment, private security patrols, even a subscription to a surveillance software meant for law enforcement. The fallout was immediate. Residents demanded reform. We set up a rotating transparency committee, open to all homeowners, to oversee future expenditures. We rewrote the dispute process from scratch and posted every policy online with plain language summaries. And then came the wild card. A man named Ray showed up at my door. He was older, maybe mid-60s, wearing a faded utility vest and holding a stack of old photographs. "You don't know me," he said, "but I used to own Lot 79, right next to yours." I invited him in. He laid out the photos on my kitchen table: black and white prints, aerial shots of the coast from the 70s. He pointed to a narrow path between two lots. Cheryl used to call this HOA access, but that path, that was a local easement, long expired. She built a fence across it in 2009 and claimed it as part of the HOA. I frowned. "That's not even part of any deed." "Nope," Ray said. "She just took it, no paperwork, no vote." We brought the photos to Tanya. She cross-referenced them with the county archives and confirmed it. Cheryl had illegally annexed a 10-foot-wide strip of land and used it to justify HOA beach access for years. Now that the path was proven to be fraudulently claimed, the access rights Cheryl had fabricated collapsed. That meant several past fines, complaints, and warnings issued under that claim were invalid. Melinda issued a formal apology on behalf of the board. Refunds were sent out, records were corrected, and Cheryl, she fled the neighborhood. One morning, her Lexus was gone. The house sat dark for days. Then a moving truck showed up. A man in overalls told Carl she'd sold the place to a couple from out of state. Cash deal, no inspection. She left behind a broken mailbox, a dead lawn, and a reputation in shambles. The new owners seemed nice. They brought cookies to the next board meeting. As for the beach, I built a small windscreen at the property line, not to block anyone out, just to mark the space. People respected it. Sometimes I'd catch a few neighbors sitting on the sand near the edge, toes in the surf. They'd wave and I'd wave back. Because the fight had never been about keeping people out. It was about standing up to someone who thought power gave her the right to rewrite reality. And now, reality was finally back in order. The last piece didn't fall into place until early September, just as the mornings started turning crisp and the beach emptied of tourists. I'd finally finished staining the deck, and Duke had taken to sleeping on the warm planks every afternoon, belly to the sun, ears flicking at invisible bugs. Life had settled into something close to normal. Then a letter arrived that changed everything. Unlike the others, this one came from the state attorney general's office. It wasn't addressed to me directly, but to the Harbor Glade Estates HOA board. Since Melinda was away at a public health conference, she asked me to retrieve the mail and forward any urgent notices to her assistant. When I opened the envelope and saw the gold state seal embossed on the corner, I froze. The letter wasn't about Cheryl. It was about the HOA itself. Specifically, a formal investigation into misuse of community funds, unauthorized surveillance contracts, and failure to comply with nonprofit corporation regulations. The state had begun digging, and the deeper they went, the more rot they found. But what caught my eye and made my stomach turn was a single line near the bottom. Preliminary evidence suggests that HOA funds were funneled to a private entity operating under the name Coastal Integrity Solutions, which maintained a hidden security camera on private property without consent. I called Tanya immediately. She met me that evening, this time wearing jeans and an old university hoodie. No legal pads, just a small flash drive she pulled from her coat pocket. "You need to see this," she said. We sat at my kitchen table as she opened a folder titled CIS Footage Archive. The footage had been turned over by a whistleblower an IT contractor Cheryl had hired to maintain the HOA's website. The videos were timestamped, dated, and disturbingly clear. One showed Carl working in his backyard with his granddaughter. Another caught Melinda unloading groceries. But the worst, a clip from 3 months back shot through my own dune grass facing my deck. I saw myself sitting in the Adirondack chair, coffee in hand, watching the tide. Duke lay beside me, tail thumping. Tanya paused the video. That camera was buried in a fake dune marker. The contractor found it last week when he came back to collect unpaid invoices. Cheryl never paid him for the last 4 months of work. I stared at the screen. She was watching all of us. Not just watching, she said. Recording, archiving, using clips as leverage. The drone was just a distraction. This was her real tool. We turned everything over to the sheriff's office that night, every file, every invoice, every metadata tag. And unlike last time, the authorities didn't hesitate. A warrant was issued for Cheryl's arrest within 48 hours. Deputies found her staying with her sister in a gated community 3 towns over. She didn't go quietly. Neighbors reported shouting, accusations, even a brief attempt to lock herself in a bathroom. But by the end of the day, she was booked at the county detention facility on charges ranging from felony invasion of privacy to wire fraud and criminal conspiracy. The fallout was immediate and brutal. The HOA's insurance carrier pulled coverage pending investigation. Vendors cut ties. The board voted unanimously to dissolve all remaining committees Cheryl had created during her tenure, many of which had existed only on paper but billed real expenses. And then came the subpoenas. 4 board members who had served under Cheryl during the height of her power were called in for questioning. 2 resigned before the interviews even began. One tried to claim ignorance, but was caught in a recorded Zoom call approving a drone perimeter expansion budget that never went through a community vote. Melinda stayed. She didn't flinch. She handed over every document, every email, every scrap of communication she'd archived after taking office. Her transparency earned her the trust of the investigators and the residents. At the next community meeting, held in the school gymnasium because the clubhouse was under audit, she stood at the front of the room gripping a folder of court filings. "I know some of you are angry," she said, "and you should be. We were lied to, manipulated, spied on. But this community is stronger than one person's obsession with control. And if we rebuild this HOA, it will be with checks, accountability, and daylight." The crowd didn't clap. They stood. Every last person in that room stood in silence, an act of solidarity that said more than applause ever could. Later that week, the county filed a civil suit against Cheryl for restitution. The amount, over $80,000 in misappropriated funds plus punitive damages. Her assets, what little remained, were frozen. Her house, already sold, was seized for additional recovery. Her Lexus, which she had transferred to her cousin to avoid seizure, was repossessed after a fraud claim. But even with Cheryl out of the picture, the community still had work to do. The board voted to place the HOA under receivership for 6 months, appointing a neutral third-party administrator with no ties to Harbor Glade. His name was Walter, a retired judge with no tolerance for nonsense. He wore suspenders, carried a pocket watch, and ran meetings like courtroom sessions. He started with a full forensic audit, every line item, every vendor, every reimbursement. Then he opened the floor to residents. That's when the stories came pouring out. A retired couple who'd been fined for having non-conforming patio furniture revealed they'd been denied appeal hearings. A single father described how Cheryl had threatened to report him to CPS over a false complaint about his kids playing in the sprinkler. A florist showed copies of permits Cheryl had buried to block her from running a home business. Walter took notes. Every night he typed up reports and posted them online with footnotes and legal references. And slowly, trust returned. By February, the HOA had a clean bill of legal health. The receiver stepped down and elections were held. Melinda was re-elected. Carl joined the board, so did Greg. They revised the charter to cap presidential terms at 2 years, mandate public budgeting sessions, and require a minimum 75% community vote for any fines above $100. As for me, I stayed out of the politics. I'd done my part. I still owned my beach, and no one questioned it anymore. But something unexpected happened that spring. One morning, I woke to the sound of shovels. I stepped out onto the deck and saw a group of neighbors, Carl, Greg, and a few others planting dune grass along the edge of my property. "What's this?" I asked. Carl waved. "Restoration project. County's offering a grant. We figured your stretch could use some reinforcement. Mind if we put in a few markers?" I looked at the stakes they were placing, plain wood, no signs, no tape, just a line of respect, a line never crossed again. "Go ahead," I said. By summer, the beach was thriving. The air felt different, lighter somehow. Kids rode bikes along the boardwalk without glancing over their shoulders. No one measured grass height or photographed garbage bins. The community newsletter came back this time with recipes, local events, even a crossword puzzle. And Cheryl, she took a plea deal, 5 years probation, 2 years of house arrest, restitution payments for as long as her name sat on a bank account. She was banned from serving on any HOA board in the state. She left the coastal region entirely. No one missed her. One evening, I sat on the deck with Tanya, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Duke lay at our feet, twitching in his sleep, probably chasing gulls in his dreams. "You ever think it'd end like this?" she asked. I shook my head. "Thought I was buying a quiet retirement, not a court battle. You won more than that," she said. "You helped fix something. That kind of thing sticks." I didn't say anything. Just looked out at the waves, rolling in smooth and steady, like they always had, like they always would. There was peace now, not just for me, but for everyone who'd lived under the shadow of one woman's obsession with power. The lines were clear. The rules were fair. The beach was quiet. And this time, the silence meant freedom.